In 453 AD, one man's death saved civilization. When Attila the Hun choked on his own blood at his wedding feast, 200,000 warriors went from unstoppable force to scattered refugees in mere months. How did a single barbarian warlord bring Rome, master of the known world, to its knees? Here's what's insane. 200,000 Hun warriors controlled more territory than Alexander the Great. The survival of Western civilization hung by a thread, and I'm not exaggerating. By the end of this video, you'll understand how one man's ambition nearly erased 1,000 years of Roman achievement, why his mysterious death saved Europe, and the shocking reason Rome's own princess invited the apocalypse. I'm going to reveal 3 specific things that will blow your mind. First, the secret meeting where a Roman diplomat discovered Attila's terrifying weakness. Something so simple, yet it changed everything. Second, why Rome's greatest general deliberately let Attila escape after defeating him in history's bloodiest battle. And third, the forbidden letter that gave Attila legal claim to half the Roman Empire. But here's what really gets me. How did nomads without cities defeat history's greatest empire? What really killed Attila on his wedding night? Was it assassination, divine punishment, or something else entirely? And get this, the refugees from his destruction accidentally created Venice. Yeah, that Venice. How could horse archers breach Roman defenses unchanged for centuries? How could one brother's murder change European history forever? And there's this Roman princess, whose desperate plea unleashed hell itself. The archaeological evidence reveals something that shouldn't exist. A triple coffin made of gold, silver, and iron, hidden somewhere beneath a river. The burial party? Executed immediately after, taking the location to their graves. We're talking about an empire that collapsed in a single day, from absolute dominance to total fragmentation. To understand how one man nearly erased Western civilization, we must first understand the world before the storm. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the notification bell because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see the fall of Rome forever. Now, let me take you back to when the world trembled. Picture this. Rome at its height controlled 2.5 million square miles, from Britain to Persia. But by the 5th century, the empire was dying. Split in two, bleeding gold to barbarian tribes, its legions shadows of their former glory. The Western Empire could barely defend Italy, let alone its frontiers. The Eastern Empire, safe behind Constantinople's massive walls, grew rich while its western cousin withered. Into this decaying world came the Huns, and nobody knew where they originated. They appeared from the Asian steppes like a plague, driving entire peoples before them. Gothic refugees spoke of demons on horseback who could shoot arrows backward while galloping at full speed. Their composite bows, crafted from wood, horn, and sinew, could punch through armor at 300 meters. Roman soldiers, trained to fight in tight formations, had never faced anything like them. Let me introduce the players in this apocalyptic drama. First, Attila. They called him the Scourge of God, and he earned it. Contemporary accounts describe a short, broad-chested man with a large head, deep-set eyes, and a thin beard. He dressed simply, ate from wooden plates while his lieutenants used gold, and spoke in a quiet voice that somehow commanded absolute obedience. Then there's Flavius Aetius, the last Roman. This guy spent his youth as a hostage among the Huns, learned their tactics, their language, their weaknesses. He'd use that knowledge to become Rome's final competent general, playing a chess game with the survival of civilization as the stakes. In Constantinople, Emperor Theodosius II, nicknamed the Weak, threw gold at every problem. His strategy? Pay the Huns to raid someone else. It worked, until it didn't. By 447, Constantinople was paying £700 of gold annually just to keep Attila away. That's the equivalent of 50,000 soldiers' yearly wages. And then there's Honoria, the desperate princess, sister to the Western Emperor Valentinian III. She was caught in a scandal with her chamberlain and faced forced marriage to a senator 3 times her age. Her solution would trigger the near destruction of the Western world. The power dynamics were insane. Eastern Rome had wealth but wouldn't share it. Western Rome had pride but no money. Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Franks, Burgundians, were caught between Roman contempt and Hunnic terror. They'd been settling in Roman territory for generations, technically federated allies but treated as barely civilized muscle. Meanwhile, the Huns operated like a protection racket on continental scale. Cities paid tribute or burned. The economic stranglehold was crushing. £700 of gold could fund schools, repair aqueducts, pay soldiers. Instead, it bought temporary peace from horse-mounted terror. But the Huns weren't just raiders. Under Attila's uncles, they'd developed from nomadic bands into a confederation controlling territory from the Caspian to the Rhine. They incorporated conquered peoples, Gepids, Ostrogoths, Alans, creating a multi-ethnic war machine. Roman ambassadors reported Hunnic nobles speaking Gothic, Latin, and Hunnic, managing a complex empire without a single permanent city. The stage was set for catastrophe. Rome, divided and weakened, faced an enemy that fought by completely different rules. The Huns had mobility, unity, and a leader about to inherit absolute power. But in 434 AD, everything changed when two brothers inherited an empire of horsemen. The death of King Ruga in 434 AD put his nephews Attila and Bled on the Hunnic throne. Joint rule was traditional, but these brothers were oil and water. Bled, the elder, loved wine and gold. Attila studied maps and counted arrows. For 11 years, they maintained an uneasy partnership that terrorized half of Europe. Let me explain the Hun military machine, because it was revolutionary. Every Hun male learned to ride before he could walk properly. By age 5, he was shooting arrows from horseback. By 15, he could put 3 arrows in flight before the first hit its target. Their composite bows, made from layers of horn and sinew, generated 160 pounds of draw weight, nearly AA English longbow. At 300 meters, a Hun arrow could penetrate Roman chainmail. At 100 meters, it could punch through shields. But here's what made them truly terrifying: speed and coordination. A Hun army could cover 100 miles a day, 3 times what Roman legions managed. They fought in units of 10, with 10 units forming 100, 10 hundreds forming 1,000. Signals from horns and flags created battlefield coordination Romans couldn't match. They'd feign retreat, drawing enemies into pursuit, then wheel around and annihilate them with arrow storms. In 441, the brothers launched their first major campaign against the Eastern Empire. The timing was perfect. Eastern Roman armies were fighting Vandals in Africa. The Huns crossed the frozen Danube and systematically destroyed every city in their path. Viminacium fell first, its population enslaved. Then Margus, Singidunum, modern Belgrade, and Sirmium. The pattern was always the same: appear suddenly, demand surrender, then assault with overwhelming force. Survivors reported clouds of arrows so thick they blocked the sun. When cities fell, adult males were killed, women and children enslaved, buildings burned to ash. The psychological warfare was deliberate. Refugees fleeing ahead spread panic faster than Hun cavalry. By 443, with Roman armies finally recalled from Africa, Theodosius II sued for peace. The Treaty of Anatolius tripled the tribute to £2,100 of gold annually, plus £6,000 in arrears. Rome also agreed to return all Hun fugitives, effectively signing their death warrants. But here's where the story takes a dark turn into nightmare territory. In 445, Bled died. Roman sources disagree on details. Jordan says assassination during a hunting trip. Priscus implies poison at a feast. What's certain is Attila emerged as sole ruler, and his first act was purging Bleda's supporters. Then something happened that shocked even the hardened Huns. Attila reformed the confederacy into an autocracy. Tribal kings became governors. The traditional council of elders became advisors with no actual power. In months, he transformed a confederation into an empire with one absolute ruler himself. The 447 campaign showed this new Attila. He didn't just raid, he aimed to cripple the Eastern Empire permanently. The Utus River battle saw Romans outnumbered 3-1. When they broke, Attila's cavalry pursued relentlessly. Over 100 cities burned in the Balkans. Thermopylae, site of ancient Greek glory, fell without resistance. Hun scouts reached within sight of Constantinople itself. Inside the capital, Emperor Theodosius II watched his empire bleed out. The city's massive walls, 12 meters high with 192 towers, were the only reason it survived. Attila lacked siege equipment for such fortifications, but he didn't need to take the city. He'd already won. The peace treaty of 447 was total humiliation. Annual tribute increased to £2,100 of gold. A strip of territory 5 days' march wide south of the Danube was evacuated, creating a no-man's land. Rome paid £6,000 of gold in missed payments. What scouts reported next sent panic through both empires. Attila was building something new: permanent camps in Hungary, arsenals of weapons, gathering the largest army ever assembled on European soil. Romans intercepted intelligence, suggesting he was learning siege warfare from captured engineers. But it was a letter from Rome that would unleash true apocalypse. In 450 AD, Princess Honoria made a choice that would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Honoria's story is where personal desperation meets continental catastrophe. Caught in an affair with her chamberlain Eugenius, who was promptly executed, she faced forced marriage to Senator Flavius Bassus Herculanus, a safe choice 3 times her age. Desperate, imprisoned in her own palace, she made a decision that would echo through the next 15 centuries. The letter she sent to Attila contained 16 words that would justify 4 years of apocalypse. "Help me escape this marriage, and I offer myself and my inheritance to you." She included her ring as proof of authenticity. But here's what the Roman historians didn't want you to know. Under Roman law, she actually had a claim to half the Western Empire as her dowry. When Attila received that ring, his advisors reported he smiled for the first time in months. Here was legal justification for everything he'd planned. He immediately sent ambassadors to Ravenna, demanding recognition of his betrothal to Honoria and delivery of his bride with her dowry, half of the Western Empire's territory. Valentinian III's rage was volcanic. He nearly executed his sister. Only their mother Galla Placidia's intervention saved her. The emperor's response to Attila was blunt. Honoria was not available for marriage, had no claim to succession, and any attempt to press this claim meant war. Attila had his excuse, but the real reason for his western pivot was strategic brilliance. The Eastern Empire had proven too tough, Constantinople's walls unbreachable, its armies reformed and dangerous. But the West, weakened by decades of civil war, its armies scattered from Britain to Africa, dependent on barbarian federates of questionable loyalty, it was ripe for conquest. The mustering began in winter 454-51. What happened in the Hungarian plains defied belief. Tribal kings arrived: daily Gepids from the north, Ostrogoths from the east, Rugians, Siri, Thuringians. Each brought their entire warrior population. Attila didn't just gather an army, he mobilized entire peoples. Roman spies reported weapon production on industrial scale, thousands of arrow bundles, spare bowstrings by the cartload, mobile forges for field repairs. Modern historians estimate 200,000 warriors assembled, the largest army Europe would see until Napoleon. But this understates the horror. Each warrior brought slaves for logistics, spare horses. Huns required 5 mounts per man for their mobility. We're talking about a moving nation of perhaps 500,000 souls, a locust swarm in human form. In spring 451, this apocalyptic force began moving west. The logistical nightmare of feeding such a host meant they had to keep moving, consuming everything in their path. They crossed the Rhine near modern Mainz, and the killing began immediately. The city burned on Easter Sunday. Chroniclers recorded the bishop died at his altar, cut down mid-prayer. Put yourself in a Frankish farmer's position, working your field near Trier. First, you notice birds fleeing eastward in unusual numbers. Then, a dust cloud on the horizon that doesn't dissipate. By the time you see the first riders, it's too late to run. The Huns didn't just pass through, they stripped regions bare. Crops burned, livestock taken or slaughtered, every piece of metal confiscated for weapons. Metz fell next, and here the archaeological evidence reveals something horrifying. The entire population, perhaps 20,000 souls, vanished. When the city was finally rebuilt decades later, workers found layers of ash mixed with human bone throughout the old city centre. Verdun, Reims, city after city fell, or paid massive bribes for temporary mercy. The pattern was consistent: appear suddenly, overwhelm defences, leave nothing but ash and memory. But Orleans would be different. This city controlled the Loire crossing, take it, and southern Gaul lay open. Attila needed it intact, with its bridges and supplies. So instead of immediate assault, he began a siege. This gave Aetius precious time. The last Roman had spent these months in desperate diplomacy. He knew Roman forces alone, maybe 30,000 professional soldiers in all Gaul, stood no chance. So he played on fear, convincing barbarian kings that Attila wouldn't stop with Rome. King Theodoric of the Visigoths commanded the largest federate force, maybe 50,000 warriors. Aetius promised him confirmation of his lands, recognition as Rome's primary ally, and critically intelligence that Attila planned to subjugate all Germanic peoples. The coalition Aetius built was unprecedented. Romans, Visigoths, Burgundians, Franks, Saxons, Alans, ancient enemies, united by terror. Combined, they might match Attila's numbers. But could they fight together? These peoples had been killing each other for generations. Orleans defenders watched Hunnic siege ladders rise against their walls. The civilian population, women, children, elderly, joined soldiers in desperate defense. Bishop Annianus promised divine intervention if they held. On June 14, 451, Hun warriors gained the walls. The city was hours from falling. Then horns in the distance, dust clouds from the south. The impossible had happened. Aetius and Theodoric had arrived with the combined relief force. What happened at Orleans gates defied all military logic. Attila, the unstoppable conqueror, ordered withdrawal. Rather than fight with a city at his back, he pulled his entire force northeast, seeking favourable ground for the battle he knew was coming. The man who would save Rome had once lived among the Huns as a hostage. Aetius knew their tactics, their psychology. He also knew this: Attila had never faced a united opposition of this scale. On a field near Chalons, 300,000 men would decide the fate of civilization. June 24, 51. Dawn at the Catalaunian Plains revealed a sight no European had seen before or would see again for 1,000 years. Morning mist clung to rolling fields, where 300,000 warriors faced each other across 5 miles of front. The fate of the Western world would be decided before sunset. The battlefield geography was crucial. A dominant ridge ran through the centre. Whoever controlled it would rain arrows and javelins down on their enemies. To the north, thick forest limited cavalry movement. South lay marshes that would trap anyone retreating that direction. Attila had chosen his ground well, but Aetius knew the terrain too. Let me paint you the scene. On the eastern side, Attila's host spread like a dark sea. He placed himself at the centre with his best Hun cavalry, 30,000 elite horse archers who'd never lost a battle. On his left wing, King Valamir commanded the Ostrogoths, eager to prove themselves against their Visigothic cousins. The right wing held Gepids under King Ardaric, with supporting tribes filling gaps. The Western coalition faced them in mirror formation. Aetius commanded the Roman left, professional soldiers anchored by the last functioning legions in Gaul. Theodoric led the Visigothic right, heavily armoured cavalry supported by infantry. The centre, crucially, was held by the Alans under King Sangiban. Aetius knew they were unreliable. Some had already tried defecting to Attila. He positioned them where they couldn't run without going through Romans or Visigoths. But then Attila noticed something that made his blood run cold. Aetius had sent Thorismund, Theodoric's eldest son, with picked cavalry on a flanking march toward the ridge. If they secured it first, Hun mobility would be neutralized. The race for the ridge began the battle. Frankish infantry, surprisingly nimble for heavy troops, sprinted uphill. Hun cavalry wheeled to intercept, but broken ground slowed their horses. What followed was brutal hand-to-hand combat as both sides fed more troops into the meat grinder. Bodies began piling up, creating obstacles for reinforcements. Here's a statistical shock. In the next 6 hours, 1 in 3 men on that field would be dead or dying. That's 100,000 casualties, more than Gettysburg, Cannae, and Agincourt combined. The ridge battle seesawed viciously. A young Alan warrior named Lauderic, fighting to prove his people's loyalty, reportedly killed 12 enemies before a gepid spear found his throat. The fighting was so intense that men couldn't swing swords. They used daggers, helmets, even teeth. Bodies piled 10 feet high in places, creating makeshift fortifications. Attila, seeing the ridge slipping away, committed his reserve. 20,000 fresh Hun cavalry swept forward in perfect formation. Their arrow storm was apocalyptic. Contemporary accounts describe 100,000 arrows darkening the sky. Roman shields sprouted shafts like porcupines. Men fell in windows, screaming. But Aetius had anticipated this. He'd trained his men in testudo formation specifically for this moment. Shields locked overhead and to the sides, creating mobile fortresses that weathered the arrow storm. When Hun horses came close, pilum thrusts brought them down, creating barriers of screaming animals. Then the unthinkable happened. The Scourge of God ordered retreat from the ridge. But this was tactical genius, not defeat. Attila's mock flight drew over-eager Visigoths into pursuit down the slope. At a horn signal, the Huns wheeled with mechanical precision. Pursuing Visigoths, strung out and disordered, met point-blank arrow volleys. Thousands fell in minutes. King Theodoric, seeing his men being slaughtered, led a personal charge to restore order. The 65-year-old king, in full armor, smashed into the Hun line like divine vengeance. His household cavalry, 3,000 of the finest warriors in Europe, followed their king into legend. The impact was tremendous. Hun lines, unprepared for heavy cavalry, buckled. But in the chaos, tragedy struck. Theodoric's horse, pierced by multiple arrows, collapsed. The king fell among thousands of trampling hooves. Some say a Hunnic spear found him, others that his own cavalry rode him down in the press. What's certain is the greatest Gothic king died in his moment of triumph, trampled into bloody mud. Father, the king has fallen. Thorismund's scream cut through battle din. Visigothic morale wavered, their king dead, surrounded by enemies. This was Attila's moment. He'd kept his best troops in reserve for exactly this psychological breaking point. The Hun elite guard warriors, who'd each killed 50 men to earn their position, struck the grieving Visigoths like a thunderbolt. These weren't just skilled fighters, they were artists of death. Their leader, Onegesius, personally cut down a dozen Visigoths trying to recover Theodoric's body. The Gothic line began crumbling. Aetius, watching from the Roman position, faced the decision of his life. His enemies were destroying each other. If he held back, both Huns and Visigoths would be weakened, leaving Rome dominant. But if Attila won completely, nothing could stop him. What happened next would haunt historians for centuries. Aetius committed his reserves, but only partially. He sent enough Romans to stabilize the line, prevent total collapse, but held back his best troops. The battle ground on in costly equilibrium. As afternoon became evening, the field was unrecognizable. Bodies carpeted the ground so thickly that cavalry couldn't charge. Warriors fought atop corpses of friends and enemies. A Burgundian chronicle recorded that a small stream running through the battlefield ran red for 3 days afterward. Attila, his army bloodied and exhausted, made a decision that shocked his commanders. As darkness fell, he ordered general withdrawal to the Hun camp. For the first time in his life, Attila the Hun had been stopped. But the night wasn't over. In the Hun camp, Attila built something that revealed his desperation, a funeral pyre of wooden saddles, hundreds of them piled high. He sat atop it with a torch, ready to immolate himself rather than be captured. The man who'd conquered half of Europe prepared to die rather than face defeat. Thorismund, meanwhile, discovered his father's body among thousands of corpses. The young prince's rage was volcanic. He wanted immediate night attack to burn the Hun camp and avenge Theodoric. Every Visigothic noble supported him. They had numbers, momentum, and burning hatred. But Aetius arrived with different counsel. In private conference, he convinced Thorismund that his brothers might usurp the Visigothic throne if he didn't return immediately. Was this Roman wisdom or manipulation? Historians still debate. What's certain is that Thorismund led the Visigothic army away at dawn, leaving Aetius dominant on the field. The sunrise of June 21 revealed apocalyptic devastation. 50,000 corpses littered the Catalaunian Plains. Wounded men crawled among the dead, calling for water in a dozen languages. Carrion birds circled in clouds so thick they cast shadows. The stench would make the area uninhabitable for months. Attila expected attack at dawn. Instead, he watched in disbelief as his enemies withdrew. First the Visigoths, then Franks and Burgundians, finally the Romans. Aetius had won the battle, but deliberately let his greatest enemy escape. Why? Because Aetius needed the Hunnic threat to maintain his own power. Without external enemies, Rome might not need the last Roman. The Hun withdrawal was orderly but costly. Wounded who couldn't ride were given mercy killings. Tons of plunder, accumulated over months, were abandoned. The force that crossed back over the Rhine numbered perhaps 120,000, still formidable, but no longer invincible. But Attila's defeat only made him more dangerous. In winter 451, he sent a message to Valentinian III. "I will come for my bride and my dowry. What I cannot take from Gaul, I will take from Italy itself." The Italian campaign of 452 would make the Gallic invasion look merciful. Aquileia, the second Rome, fell after 3 months of siege. When the walls finally broke, Attila ordered total destruction. The city burned for 3 weeks. Archaeological digs find a layer of ash 3 feet thick, covering the entire ancient city. The population, 100,000 souls, vanished completely. Most were killed. Survivors fled to coastal lagoons. Then something happened that created one of history's most beautiful cities. These refugees, hiding in marshy islands, began building on stilts and boats. They created Venice beauty born from terror. Every magnificent palace in that floating city exists because Attila destroyed their ancestors' homes. Milan fell next, its churches looted, population enslaved. Verona, Vicenza, Bergamo, Brescia, city after city submitted or burned. Italian refugees reported horrors. Children speared for sport, women taken as slaves, men worked to death building siege equipment. Each city that fell made the next surrender faster. The Roman Senate watched smoke columns rise from 7 cities simultaneously. Italy hadn't seen such devastation since Hannibal, 650 years earlier. Emperor Valentinian III prepared to flee to Gaul. It seemed nothing could stop the Hunnic apocalypse. But as Attila approached Rome, nature itself intervened. What stopped history's most feared conqueror wasn't Roman steel, but something far more mundane. The Italian summer of 452 brought an enemy Attila couldn't fight: disease. His army, swollen with slaves and plunder, became a breeding ground for what contemporary sources call heaven's vengeance. Modern historians suspect bubonic plague or dysentery. Whatever it was, it spread through the Hun camp like wildfire. Picture the scene. 200,000 people crowded in makeshift camps, poor sanitation, Italian heat, and contaminated water sources. Warriors who'd survived 100 battles died groaning in their own filth. The mighty Hun cavalry, reduced to walking because horses died even faster than men. By August, Attila was losing 1,000 men daily to disease. Famine compounded the catastrophe. Northern Italy, ravaged by 2 years of war, couldn't feed such a host. Attila's army had consumed everything: grain stores, livestock, even seed corn for next year's planting. Starving warriors ate their horses, then leather equipment, finally turned to cannibalism. The unstoppable Hunnic war machine ground to a halt, not from enemy action, but from biological reality. It was in this desperate moment that Pope Leo I made his legendary journey. The meeting at the Mincio River near Mantua has been mythologized beyond recognition. Raphael painted saints with flaming swords backing the Pope. The reality was probably more mundane but no less significant. Leo came with a practical offer: massive gold tribute if Attila withdrew, plus grain supplies for the journey home. More importantly, he brought intelligence. Eastern Roman armies under Marcian were attacking Hunnic territories while Attila was absent. His empire was burning while he chased glory in Italy. The Pope also supposedly warned that Alaric had died shortly after sacking Rome. Did Attila want to tempt the same fate? Whatever was said, Attila withdrew. His army, reduced by 40,000 from disease and starvation, struggled back across the Alps. Italian survivors described the retreat route: a road of corpses, abandoned wagons, dying stragglers begging for mercy that never came. The terror of Europe limped home like a wounded beast. In his Hungarian stronghold, Attila planned furiously for 453's campaigns. He negotiated with Vandals for a joint attack on Rome. He recruited new tribes, demanded fresh tributes, rebuilt his army with terrifying speed. Roman ambassadors reported he spoke constantly of returning to claim his bride, burn Rome, salt Italian fields. But fate had other plans. In March 453, Attila took another wife, a beautiful young woman named Ildico, possibly Germanic or Gothic. The wedding feast was typically excessive: rivers of wine, mountains of meat, celebrating warriors. Priscus records that Attila drank more than usual, boasting of sons Ildico would bear, future conquerors of the world. The next morning, March 21, 453, Attila's guards grew concerned when their king didn't emerge. Breaking down the door, they found a scene that would echo through history. Attila lay dead in a pool of blood. Ildico cowered in a corner, hysterical with fear, her clothes blood-stained. What really happened that night? Theories abound. The official story: excessive drinking caused a nosebleed, and Attila drowned in his own blood, a warrior who conquered nations killed by wine. But many suspected assassination. Did Ildico act for her conquered people? Was she an Eastern Roman agent? Some claimed Marcian in Constantinople dreamed of Attila's death that very night, suggesting coordinated intelligence. Medical historians propose alternative theories. Attila's symptoms: sudden hemorrhaging, possible esophageal varices, suggest chronic alcohol abuse. Or perhaps a cerebral hemorrhage, brought on by stress and excessive celebration. The mystery endures because the Huns, suspicious of everyone, conducted no investigation. Dead was dead. The funeral was spectacular and mysterious. Warriors gashed their faces, mixing blood with tears, proper mourning for a war chief. They carried Attila's body in a silk tent through his empire, allowing subject peoples to pay respects or gloat secretly. Then came the burial, shrouded in secrecy that persists today. Legend says Attila was placed in 3 coffins: iron for strength, silver for nobility, gold for kingship. The location? Somewhere beneath a diverted river, probably the Tisa. Workers dammed the flow, dug deep, placed the triple coffin with treasures beyond counting, then restored the river's course. But here's where it gets dark. Every member of the burial party, perhaps 100 men who knew the location, was immediately executed. Their killers were then killed by others, creating layers of death protecting the secret. 15 centuries later, despite countless searches, Attila's tomb remains hidden. The gold alone would be worth billions today. The empire's collapse was instantaneous. Within hours of Attila's death, subject kings were asserting independence. His sons Elac, Dengizic, Ernak, and others immediately began fighting over succession. The Hunnic tradition of divided inheritance met the reality of Attila's centralized empire, and the result was catastrophic. Ardaric of the Gepids, Attila's most trusted lieutenant, saw opportunity. He formed a coalition of subject peoples, Germanic tribes, tired of Hunnic domination. The message spread like wildfire: the tyrant is dead, the time for revenge is now. In 454, just 1 year after Attila's death, The decisive Battle of Nadao took place in modern Serbia. Elac, trying to hold his father's empire together, faced the combined fury of peoples his father had oppressed. The battle was less military engagement than vengeful slaughter. Elac died with 30,000 Hunnic warriors. Survivors scattered, some fled east to the steppes. Others were absorbed by victorious tribes. In one afternoon, an empire controlling 2 million square miles simply ceased to exist. The speed of collapse was breathtaking. In 453, Attila commanded territory from the Rhine to the Caspian. By 455, Hun was already becoming a word for scattered refugees. Dengizic tried maintaining a rump state, was killed by Eastern Romans in 469. Ernak led survivors to modern Bulgaria, where they vanished into historical obscurity. But the Huns' disappearance didn't undo their catastrophic impact. The Hunnic catastrophe triggered the Great Migration's final, most decisive phase. With Attila's empire gone, Germanic tribes rushed to fill the vacuum. Visigoths solidified control of Spain and southern Gaul. Franks, no longer fearing Hunnic retribution, expanded from their Rhine strongholds to dominate what would become France. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, fleeing Hunnic pressure, accelerated their invasion of Britain, forever changing that island's destiny. Western Rome never recovered from Attila's devastation. The empire that survived him was hollowed out, its economy shattered, its confidence broken. Just 23 years after Attila's death, in 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The symbolism was perfect. Rome's final emperor bore the name of its founder and first emperor, diminished to a mocking diminutive. The Eastern Empire learned different lessons. Constantinople's walls had saved it, so Byzantium invested in fortifications. They adopted Hun-style cavalry tactics, creating cataphracts that would dominate medieval battlefields. Most importantly, they learned diplomacy could be cheaper than war. The Byzantine Empire would survive another 1,000 years, partly because they'd seen what happened when diplomacy failed. Venice rose from Aquileia's ashes, becoming the merchant jewel of the Mediterranean. Every Gothic palace, every Byzantine church, every bridge over those serene canals exists because refugees needed somewhere to hide from Attila's fury. Beauty from terror history's ironic compensation. The demographic revolution was profound. Modern DNA analysis reveals Hunnic genetic markers scattered across Europe, from Hungary to France, Italy to the Balkans. The warriors who terrorized Rome became farmers, merchants, Europeans. Their descendants walk Amsterdam's streets, work in Milanese offices, unaware their ancestors rode with the Scourge of God. What if Attila had lived another decade? Historians' counterfactuals are chilling. With competent siege equipment and recovered armies, he might have taken Rome, even Constantinople. Christianity, still consolidating its dominance, might have been crushed under pagan hooves. The Renaissance, dependent on preserved classical knowledge, might never have occurred. One wedding night's mysterious death literally saved Western civilization. Character epilogues add bitter irony. Aetius, who saved Rome at Chalons, was assassinated by Emperor Valentinian III in 454. The paranoid emperor feared his general's popularity. Valentinian himself was killed months later by Aetius's supporters. The Western Empire ate itself while external threats multiplied. Princess Honoria, whose desperate letter triggered continental apocalypse, vanishes from historical record after 452. Did Valentinian finally execute her? Did she live in imprisoned obscurity? Her fate remains unknown, fitting for someone whose personal crisis caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. The greatest mystery remains Attila's tomb. Despite metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and satellite imaging, those triple coffins stay hidden. Somewhere beneath Hungarian soil lies tons of Roman gold, Hunnic weapons, perhaps written records that would revolutionize our understanding. The Tisa River keeps its secrets. The final paradox. Attila the Hun, whose very name meant little father in Gothic, saved Europe by dying. His empire's instant fragmentation prevented any successor from achieving similar power. The Germanic kingdoms that emerged created the political foundation for modern European nations. The Scourge of God, destroyer of the ancient world, accidentally midwifed the medieval one. In history's darkest moments, the thread of civilization proves both stronger and thinner than we imagine. One man's ambition brought Rome to its knees. One mysterious death allowed it to transform into something new. Perhaps that's history's greatest lesson: empires fall not from single catastrophes but from accumulated wounds. And sometimes, just sometimes, a wedding toast changes everything. The apocalypse rode on horseback. It died in a marriage bed. And from its ashes, Europe was born.